Okay, so I was gone for a couple of weeks. Went on holiday. Computer broke. A lot of shit went down. I did a lot of painting. Drawing with pens. I studied a lot of Adam Hughes. He's a comic artist. Really good at drawing females effectively. Very strong kind of depictions of females. The female form, the female face, and I wanted to draw from that. So a lot of my pen studies were of Adam Hughes and how he depicted the female face especially. I learned that having my tools limited to the pen only and a marker gave way to thinking about how to be creative within those limitations, in the same way that you can use a color palette that's limited in terms of hues. You can use various saturations and various values to get a desired result, and that result is generally, because it is as a result of you trying to think outside of the box a little bit or trying to think in a different way, the result is often more creative, right? Kind of in a natural way. Same thing with, to an extent, with having a limited tool, i.e. a pen or a marker. So yeah, I was doing studies of Adam Hughes and the faces on his females. Very high contrast in the eyes and the lips. It lets you read it very fast. And it lets you understand kind of what he's trying to get across. He does very feminine depictions of women, which makes it easy to read, right? So I wanted to take elements of that and put them into paintings that I do. So I looked at the shapes that he used for the eyes, the shapes that he used for the lips, how he positioned them in perspective, the expressions he kind of gave them, and I studied those. Another method of study I used was to posterize into black and white images of very feminine females, and that kind of allowed me to see those raw shapes easier, and I could learn some of them and kind of add them to my visual library, I suppose, in a much more digestible way than if they were just the raw image, right? If they're just two shapes of black and white, then they're much more easy to remember, as opposed to a full spectrum of values and colours. So I did that, and the painting you're watching is as a result of a lot of these studies. It took 10 minutes. It took as long as the recording is long, because I didn't speed it up. But yeah, those studies were successful. I combined a bit of an approach that I learned from Anthony Jones. I studied that approach. He essentially just used, straight from the get-go, an opaque black brush, which gives you those very solid shapes, very bold shapes. I think doing it this way is much more difficult than laying down a preliminary sketch beforehand and then overlaying opaque ink on top of that, simply because you kind of need to get it right first time, even more so if you're not working digitally, because you can't erase that black ink once it's down, right? Which is why I think a lot of the traditional comic artists did use preliminary pencil sketches, but on digital, that's not necessarily the most efficient way of going about it. It can be, but it might not be. Another thing that I learned about Adam Hughes and the way he paints, going back to what I was saying about having like a limited tool set, the way he rendered hair with a marker was very inspiring, right? he laid down the preliminary with a pencil, very loose sketch as usual. Then the strokes that he made using the marker allowed the hair to retain volume, as in he wasn't scribbling with the marker. The way the marker overlays over itself, right, kind of like in a layering effect. He used those lighter areas that had been gone over less with the marker to create volume in the hair, which is it shows a very efficient use of a tool, right? It's something that I admire very much, something that I really want to be able to put into my own work, that kind of efficient brushstroke. And obviously him doing it on a traditional medium with no undo button is even more impressive, right? So that level of kind of motor skill and just kind of knowledge of the subject that he's painting, that is a level that I definitely aspire to. So I think some studies, or some practice rather, of brushwork is in order, especially when it comes to hair and that kind of overlaying effect, the kind of layering on of brushstrokes in a very efficient manner. What I also would like to study is, in that same vein, kind of, basically marker pens, they act in a very similar way to how like the standard round brush on Photoshop works, if it has no spacing, in the sense that it layers over itself with different strokes of the pen. This isn't like, so for example, if I put down one stroke of, say, 75% pressure applied onto the canvas, that'll result in a certain value of black, or a certain value rather, and that's if I have selected the black value, like a value of 0. Then if I go over that same brushstroke again, there will be a layering effect, right, where the area where the brushstrokes overlap will be darkened closer towards the selected value of black. And the markers act in a very similar way. There's kind of a layering effect, and that's why kind of Adam Hughes' technique of layering his marker strokes caught my eye. It's something that can be replicated on a digital medium. So yeah, again, it's something I want to study. But also, in that same vein, another artist who uses a similar technique, or at least he used to, is Anthony Jones. I looked at a couple of his old paintings, and this kind of layering technique, using the nature of Photoshop's brushes to his advantage, he was able to create a similar effect that Adam Hughes created in a pretty different way, but the principles are still there. The principles of layering kind of brushstrokes, and how often your hand kind of comes off, your pen comes off the canvas. So yeah, I'm gonna do some studies of those. I started doing a couple of studies today, and I learned a thing or two about how to go about using that layering thing in a process. I did a couple of anatomy studies using it. They turned out pretty successful. Tomorrow I'm just gonna do more practice of that, because I've already reached a point in the female face studying where I think I've learned quite a bit. I'll let that kind of settle in my mind and then go back to it at a later date. But for now, I think kind of mastering that efficient layering of brushstrokes is really the next thing on the list, right? So that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'll try and learn as much as I can. And yeah, that's about it. Bye.